This work explains the key role of schizophrenia within the big picture. Schizophrenia should primarily be understood and not be fought. Furthermore, this work reveals why we can find occult symbols everywhere in the mainstream regardless of the industry. The fate of the human being viewed as an individual takes no account of vanity. A young man with goals and dreams and the love of his life hears voices in his head. It doesn't take long for academic psychology to diagnose severe schizophrenia. But what is schizophrenia? Psychologists know the symptoms and know which pharmaceutical products collaterally paralyze the brain areas in order to deactivate the symptoms. But most ladies and gentlemen of neurology and psychology have never dealt intensively with mysticism in order to be able to recognize that someone has been chosen here. Our mind is an incredible divine existence. Not the mind is part of us, no, we are part of the mind. What most people consciously perceive as mind is only a fraction of what pulls the strings in the entire mankind, and we are connected to it. You only need the keys that open the rooms of revelation for you. One of these rooms is the subconscious. What we consciously register and consciously process as individuals is also only a fraction of the information that the mind collects and transfers to the subconscious. The ego always wants to increase self-worth. Everything that endangers the self-worth is fought or suppressed, so the ego also functions as a kind of control center for self-worth regulation and is addicted to control. When we sleep, the ego and the control center sleep too. All suppressed or not perceived data from the subconscious can now get unfiltered through open channel lines into your awareness. Visualizations and acoustics of all kinds, complex known and unknown intelligences that communicate with us, repressed dangers, unpleasant situations, beautiful moments, everything can come from subconscious into our awareness as soon as the control center is not active during the sleep phase. And this is what we call dreaming. Dreams are very deep and complex. If you think that you have been dreaming crazy nonsense, it is only because you are unable to analyze that your mind confronts you with feelings of shame, feelings of fear, or similar emotional feelings in order to draw your attention to your degree. But that's another complex story. Now let's get back to schizophrenia. Schizophrenics hear voices in their heads, change personalities, see and hear things that others cannot hear and see. And those who are not affected find it difficult to imagine what schizophrenia feels like. But we have just learned how complex are the visualizations that occur us in sleep, because channel lines to the subconscious are open that are closed in the waking state. In schizophrenic people, certain channel lines are open even if those people are awake, and areas of the brain are active which in normal people are only active in sleep, so that a complex intelligence can come from the subconscious into the awareness while those people are awake. Those chosen by fate feel the constant presence of another or more existences. They hear sharp comments about actions and face a fear of losing control. From here on, the universal process of destruction takes place, which leads to the death of the ego, which is extremely painful. He has to let go of everything that this person has hoped for and dreamed of for his own future. Everything that was important to this person he will lose. In the first few years, the chosen one resorts to pharmaceutical drugs that numb his brain activity. If he takes medication, he is no longer the same. If he does not take any, he is not the same either. He will lose everything and have to bury his dreams. The love of his life has left him. For years, the question "why me?" tormented him. At some point, he will stop taking the medication and surrender to his fate. He will open the gates and have discarded everything that all other people are clinging to. At this moment, his transformation will come to an end and he will not suffer anymore. From this moment on, he serves a universal mission. The following scenes do not represent a privacy breach because the person to be seen enjoys an extremely high reputation in the mind of the medium, precisely because something like their own reputation does not exist in his consciousness, which is why privacy breach are irrelevant for this person, which does not mean that this person is not competent to speak. In addition, these people and the medium act for, how should we say, the same divinity.
So we see here a person with a severe form of schizophrenia, and I translate his speeches with subtext so you can listen the original and feel his attitude.
Dass ihr alle wieder da seid, das ist so schön kuschelig. Das ist so knuschelig mit euch. Schön, dass ihr alle wieder da seid. Das ist so knuschelig, so knuschelig mit euch. Ich hab euch ganz doll lieb. Das ist so knuschelig mit euch. Ich hab euch so lieb. Was singt denn da? Was singt denn da?
Look what he's doing. It makes no sense, right? Like things you see sometimes in your dreams, right? It makes no sense. But it makes sense. This shows that this man got no vanity. And the origin of vanity is always the ego. So this dude got no ego. He's totally free. And now he's attacking vanity with that, look, I'm good enough to go in the city. Can I go like this in the city?
Entschuldigung, geht das noch so mit meinem Haar? Entschuldigung, geht das so mit meinem Haar? Da kann ich mich so in die Stadt trauen.
And he's attacking cultural behavior when he says, oh, nice to see you all. How are you? Oh, nice to see you all.
Dass ihr alle wieder da seid, das ist so schön knuschelig. Das ist so knuschelig mit euch. Schön, dass ihr alle wieder da seid. Das ist so knuschelig, so knuschelig mit euch. Ich hab euch ganz doll lieb. Das ist so knuschelig mit euch. Ich hab euch so lieb.
He's attacking that cultural behavior. And this is another interesting scene, so watch close and after that I tell you what's going on.
Soll ich mal mein Geräusch machen? So?
You see what happened? With his madman screaming, he attacks the cultivated private zone, what also is an attack on cultivated behavior. And then something interesting happened. The girls who are filming this guy begin to laugh loud. And then he responds to this laughing girls and say, ha he tolala, ha 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 tolala. And then the girls get it that he reacts to them, and some girls still laugh and some stop to laugh and maybe become a little bit scared. And then he is dissing even harder when he is acting a mix of laughing and crying. Yes, this is really deep because these girls don't know that they are subconsciously addicted to dopamine or other happy hormones, and that's why they force to laugh about something. The ego just can't be quiet. We want to laugh 24/7. 24/7 we want eat, fuck, laugh and spend money. But there's nothing to laugh about what he does. We are just junkies. You see the deep way he attacks ego? It doesn't matter for him if he attacks the ego of a grandma in the bus or a teenage girl in the street or the president or the king in China. It doesn't matter for him. Centuries ago they would have carried out an exorcism on him because they would have believed there is a demon in him. But the demon is in us and he attacks this demon / the ego.
Soll ich mal mein Geräusch machen? So.
With this mix of laughing and crying, he reflects the inner emotional state of the girls. First they laughed because they forced themselves to laugh because of subconscious addiction to dopamine, and then they were shocked about his sharp reaction, and he attacked this situation with this mix of laughing and crying. This is hard deep dissing. He acts like the universe because the universe even does not care whether you are a teenage girl or an old man. If you are not humble, you will get your karma for it. No matter your age, your status, your gender or whatever, he doesn't care, like the universe. He is something special because his ego really died. You must imagine he was not born like this. It was a painful transformation path and he had to die for that transformation. I know people who came back from an ayahuasca trip and they told me how hard that trip was and that they kill their ego and that they know how to kill the ego, but all that knowledge was pumping up the ego. We can't kill the ego. We are damned to be humble. Even the wise man, especially the wise man, cause the wise man needs their own ego for his research. But the wise man is humble, so the ego cannot develop. We cannot kill the ego. Only God can do this with a hard story like this guy was going through. Or think about Jesus. What was Jesus' last words in the Bible version? It's done. He said it's done. You know what he means? The death of the ego. That's the meaning of it's done. But you know how hard Jesus' way was until this was happen. We are not able to force the death of the ego, but we can be humble. So look at this dude. He was going a hard path, but now he is free. No ego, no vanity, no shame, no fear. He is a king of a world from which you run away.
And to conclude the first section of this video, we are now explaining to you the mystical meaning of the schizophrenic, and that is now very, very profound. So the intelligence that emerges in this form of schizophrenia makes fun of the culturate and has no respect for culturate behavior. And everyone says he's crazy. I, as a medium, say I understand him. I listen to what he has to say like a cabaret artist, only that I find him more interesting and deeper than the best cabaret artist, because he doesn't want to be funny and nevertheless he makes me smile. He doesn't want any money and still survives. He doesn't need an audience but everyone is watching him, and his mission is mystical because he attacks one of the greatest jokes in human history, the cultivate. So the cultivated is a joke most of the time already. Let's get to the bottom of this. Do you know what we humans are afraid of? Loss of self-worth. That is our fear. For example, a young man goes to the club with his girlfriend and another stronger man seduces his girlfriend and there is nothing he can do about it. These are our fears. When a woman leaves her husband or a man leaves his wife, in most cases, most of the pain is not due to missing the other person, but rather to loss of self-worth. The ego suffers from the fact that the desired person can do without you and you yourself are apparently not good enough to be indispensable. Our real fear is the fear of loss of self-worth, and there is a very interesting saying that people in Germany say, "Children can be mean," and that is exactly where our pain is buried. And now comes the punchline. All of our cultivated codes of conduct in our society are the creation of the collective ego that has found a way to protect self-worth. We are all traumatized from childhood and adolescence, but people pretend that the cultivated behavior is a sign of maturity and wisdom, but at the core it is a collective cohesion of traumatized people who have taken refuge in a cultivated manner in which the self-worth of each individual is better protected and in which one can easily marginalize the uncultivated, since the uncultivated always poses a threat to the self-worth of the environment. Don't get us wrong, of course there's also the cultivated that arises out of wisdom, but in most cases our cultivated structures are from a self-centered origin. The intelligence that takes control in this form of schizophrenia humiliates these cultivation structures, as these cultivation structures are a creation of the collective ego that created these cultivation structures to protect themselves and their own self-worth. Symbolically speaking, those who were thrown in the trash can in their teenage years are still traumatized by this self-worth humiliation and glad to have been spared such a self-worth humiliation in the cultured adult world. And those who used to throw others in the trash in order to humiliate them and to feel superior have learned to behave in a cultivated manner, because otherwise they would be marginalized in a cultivated adult society, which also leads to loss of self-worth. And so it happens that the boy in the garbage can and the boy who threw him in there shake hands today in a cultivated manner and hold cultivated small talk, but deep inside one is still a coward and the other is still a tormentor. And therefore we bow to the schizophrenic who humiliates the self-worth protective construct, because the spiritual revolution from human to superhuman does not consist in protecting self-worth, but in the fact that the self-worth regulation of the ego is rejected by a more developed mind through self-awareness. And we have great respect for the schizophrenic, who you don't know how hard the path up to this transformation was, in which many would commit suicide if they began to hear voices in their heads or if they lost control. The other point is the mystical mission that schizophrenia carries out to constantly attack the ego, because everything develops towards the superhuman existence in which the ego of the individual can no longer develop. Nevertheless, the history of our universe has been written in such a way that this collective ego just exists as a cancerous tumor in the collective mind. And why this is so and what the schizophrenic has to do with it will now be revealed to you when we talk about the impressive perpetual motion machine called world economy, which will also reveal why there are occult symbols to be found everywhere in the mainstream. Short for those who don't know what a perpetual motion machine is. The general definition is a utopian machine that does work all the time without a supply of energy. But the perpetual motion machine is not utopian, it is real and of a mystical nature, and we know it under the name of world economy. And you don't know in the least how much influence the schizophrenic has on this perpetual motion machine. But more on that in a moment. First of all, we want to make it clear to you how this world economy works and why it is a perpetual motion machine. Simple example, what do you need to build a pyramid? You need at least an architect, you need an engineer for the necessary machines, and otherwise you need a lot of people who are ready to carry heavy stones from A to B for 8 to 12 hours almost every day. And do you know why people do that? Not because they also want to build a pyramid. The slaves are not interested in that. And they don't just want to feed their families, no. The slaves do this in order to be able to buy status goods. Because the possession of these status goods determines the social status, which in turn regulates the self-worth. When self-worth increases, feelings of happiness like dopamine, endorphin, serotonin arise. When self-worth is lost, for example through humiliation, depression develops. Therefore, the increase in self-worth is an addiction of ours, whereby the self-worth loss is something that the ego prevents by all means, through repression into the subconscious, through destruction with hatred and anger, through reciprocated humiliation, etc. If you now recognize the connection that the social status has a direct influence on self-worth, then it is easy to see that the power of the world economy is the ego, through which people get the energy to carry heavy stones from A to B in order to be able to buy something that improves the status or at least secures it, in order not to have to make the painful experience of humiliation. The ego generates egocentric energies, for example such as zeal, with which entire cities are built. All that you have to give the ego is a plus and a minus pole on which the ego is oriented in the duality, whereby the plus pole forms the highest social status like superstars, top politicians, business moguls, etc. And the minus pole is presented by the schizophrenic. The poor lonely figure with a loss of control is the worst case for every ego. These two plus and minus poles on which the ego is oriented let the ego become active. Through fear of losing self-worth, it generates energy what represents the minus pole, and the desire to increase self-worth also generates energy what represents the plus pole. Thus, the ego is caught between these duality poles and tries to escape minus and to achieve plus, which has generated an unimaginable amount of energy over the centuries that set the perpetual motion machine in motion. On this scale of duality, you can see how the ego generates energy between the plus and minus poles. The schizophrenic represents the minus pole, what is the worst case scenario for the ego, even worse than the homeless beggar, because the ego is most afraid of losing control, because the ego always wants control in order to be able to suppress or regulate self-worth damaging situations and impulses. Right at the top as the plus pole are the elites from music, sport, politics, business, etc. And in between there is the upper class, the middle class, the socially needy, the beggars. Almost no one is aware of the fact how active the schizophrenic madman is in our subconscious. An intelligent, eloquent person who has both feet firmly established in the upper middle class would never know that he is afraid of going crazy. But this fear is there. This fear is deep within us, in a place that very few people will get to know in their life. Crazy schizophrenics often hang out in areas where people go to shop and consume. Their uninhibited calls and gestures eat their way deep into our subconscious. The crazy schizophrenic is the king in a world from which you run away. He's the king of hell and his mission is mystical. He digs deep into our subconscious. Even if your ego suppresses his presence and you continue to your consumption, it leaves a deep trace of fear in you that you could lose control of your life. But the loss of control and the devotion to fate are a very decisive point for the Holy Grail and the related transformation of the mind. And it is precisely at this point that the key function of the schizophrenic is revealed. Almost everyone will see a schizophrenic person at least once in their life because of the range of one schizophrenic, and that's enough to make most people's fear of losing control so great that they never get the worth of being able to reach a certain degree, because this should not be the case in this era. Not everyone is supposed to reach a high degree in this era. To get the bigger picture here, you have to watch the revelation of this era. There you will understand the relationship between population reduction and this work here. The elites at the top as plus pole also act consciously or unconsciously for a mystical mission. Therefore, you can also recognize occult symbols in those who consciously understand it. But not everyone who shows symbols is an initiate. That person could just as well be a puppet, and in most cases they are puppets. But it is a fact that the plus and minus pole people exists on behalf of the all-seeing eye to activate an ego that fights for its self-worth between these duality poles, which has generated an unimaginable amount of energy over the centuries. To be able to observe all of this changes your degree. Being able to see your own ego as it is trapped in duality within these two poles raises your mind to a higher level. This construct is really a perpetual motion machine because all the egos in this world activate each other. The successful one shows his success and generates energies in other egos such as zeal or greed. These egos in turn activate other egos. The beggar is also seen by many egos and generates unconscious fear energies in these egos. The existence of the ego serves to generate energy, and at the same time the ego is the individual's hurdle for spiritual development. Either you are a slave to this energy generator called ego or a manipulator of this energy generator, whereby a true manipulator with a high degree can never be of malicious nature. But that does not mean that there are no malicious, intelligent manipulators in this world. This perpetual motion machine is a masterpiece of the collective mind, so of course you can also see mystical symbols that pay homage to the creator of this work, namely the all-seeing eye / the mind. And of course you also see symbols of the devil, but as already explained in the revelation of this era, the devil is a metaphoric for the ego. The ego is the devil, and thus the devil is in all of us. And since the ego is the decisive energy generating existence for this perpetual motion machine, you will of course also see devilish symbols within this mystical perpetual motion machine. As already explained by us, the 6 is a spiral, and a spiral always leads into the center, so the 6 symbolizes the egocentric view. So if you see a diabolical symbol, it is an indication that this company is aware that ego energies are necessary for the success of this company. Everything is part of this perpetual motion machine: the music industry, sport, politics, science, religion, Hollywood, etc. In all these areas there are hierarchies which have the same meaning as this scale. This perpetual motion machine is always about activating the ego with impulses, plus and minus, whereby the one with the highest degree of schizophrenia presents the deepest minus point, but at the same time he is a king who is allowed to live true freedom without pain. Hallelujah.